For those of you who may just be joining us, I wanted to welcome you to CRL's 2017 CRL Global Resources Collections Forum. This is an opportunity that CRL takes every year in conjunction with this annual meeting, the Council of Voting Members, to share some information about our programs, the activities that we've done over the past year, and to collect your feedback on how we might shape our agenda in the coming year or in coming years. We tend to alternate years between a live event and a virtual event, and this year is a virtual event, so we're coming at you from the halls of CRL, and Bernie and Reilly and myself are the ones who are presenting today on two aspects. We just covered CRL's agenda on licensing of global data. I'd like to open up session 2 here to present on shaping CRL's agenda on digitizing global collections. We've been broadly talking this afternoon about CRL's agenda for electronic resources, and digitization is one of those areas that we've discussed multiple times in the past, and electronic access is very important for CRL's future. So we're going to tackle this session under 3 main parts, in which Bernard Reilly, myself, and Mary Rader from the South Asia Open Archives Project are going to talk about some very specific initiatives that we've been working on here, and to get your feedback and answer questions on these various topics. I'd like to lead off by introducing Bernard Reilly, President, who, if you're sticking with us from part 1, President of CRL, who will be addressing an update on CRL's digital resource building. He will be talking about ways that CRL is increasingly looking to democratize the digitization and selection decisions that CRL makes in terms of the strategic digitization. So Bernie, if you're ready, I'll be happy to turn it over to you.
Yeah, we're all set. Thanks,
Great.
James. The CRL has been a place where collections are built and are preserved for the long term by communities of interest working under our organizational umbrella. We have a long history of cooperative preservation and collection development. Since the 1960s, the area materials, or the area microform projects, now the area materials projects, have been identifying important at-risk materials for preservation, and those collections have been, those materials have been preserved primarily through microfilm, increasingly through digitization, and are hosted by CRL. The key to the success of these operations and their sustainability over time has been that they've involved communities of subject specialists, knowledgeable people identifying and preserving critical at-risk source materials. Another mechanism we use for deciding what to digitize, or prioritizing what to digitize in terms of legacy materials, is on-request digitization. We very often fulfill requests for the interlibrary loan of microform and print by digitizing materials and hosting those digital files on the web. In fact, last year we fulfilled over 1,600 requests that way in response to interlibrary loan requests from researchers at member institutions. Planned digitization, we do work more systematically as well, and so we are working with the Law Library Microform Consortium, or LLMC, to identify, prioritize important legal and government publications and materials, mostly printed, published materials that are important to scholars and are endangered or disappearing, and those get digitized that way. We've also we were funded last year by Carnegie Corporation to do a couple years ago to digitize a number of official gazettes held by CRL, aggregated and held by CRL in print form and in microform, and did put those on the web. The way we determined what was important to do out of the larger collection that we hold was we focused on materials that were likely to disappear or be suppressed in their countries of origin. So these were materials that were published by governments that are notoriously corrupt and repressive. The World Newspaper Archives was a program where we digitized several million pages of foreign newspapers, mostly from microfilm. And those were identified by our area materials groups. Those are materials in the area of Latin American studies, Sub-Saharan African studies, South Asian studies. And so all of these programs are programs where we draw upon the expertise and the knowledge and the interests of our knowledgeable people at our member institutions. We are always trying to figure out ways of making that work better and be more efficient. And so this year we've developed a new platform for drawing more broadly on the expertise that resides in our member institutions for the prioritization of our digitization programs. And I'll show you, I'm going to go to that, switch the screen to that resource here and show you what's now a work in progress. This is what we're calling the Global Collections Platform, and we populated it with some sample proposals of collections to be considered for digitization by CRL and its partners. And those range from things like a collection of Afghan jihadist journals that are happen to be held by CRL. We've actually loaned these materials to a researcher last year, and they are materials that are ripe for digitization. Unfortunately, they're all printed upside down. What we have here is a platform, really a framework for aggregating expertise about what the cost of digitizing the material would be, estimated costs and metadata, that kind of thing, and other information, details and sources of the information, what institution holds the original materials. In this case, it was CRL. But this is designed to help us aggregate information. I'll just show you one of the ones I've kind of fallen in love with since we started thinking about this thing. This is actually a project that's been proposed for the Cooperative Africana Materials Project. This is a digitization of Caribbean periodicals, ones from Cuba and Jamaica. And these have been identified by our Africana, one of the people of the Africana group, and gave us a good justification and reason for digitization of them, and fairly detailed information about what would be involved in digitization of them. So this will function as kind of a knowledge base, but also a place where people at member institutions can say they're interested in the proposal. They can do a yes, a thumbs up for it, and that'll be registered in the platform. They can decide they want to follow this, so when we update the entry on it, they'll be notified by mail. This is using the watch function on it. And when the time comes, they'll actually be able to vote on potential projects. And I want to see where on my list, yeah, this shows you a sample of a ballot we put together. Again, this is the preliminary set of collections that we would consider digitizing under the Global Collections Initiative. This is a Benson collection of serials on microform, Mexican intelligence files from Northwest being aggregated by a faculty member at Northwestern University, and official gazettes from Guatemala. When the time comes, we will have the experts that we've identified at member institutions, participating institutions, to vote on these and say which ones are the favorite ones. This is one of my favorites. And then the results will factor into CRL's decisions about digitization. So that's pretty much what we're proposing to do. We think this is going to help make the cooperation that we support a little bit more robust and a little bit more effective. I think this could be a place where we could we could develop proposals or post proposals for things like the IPUMs, the census, the digitization of the census materials, the IPUMs, and that kind of thing, and gather input from the members of the CRL community on how to finance digitization of that, and to what extent that is a priority for CRL. But it's a tool, but I think it'll be one. We're hoping it'll wind up being an important tool and a useful tool. Thanks very much. The ability to determine priorities for digitization, for CRL digitization, has become more important because of the shared print, the urgency of ramping up and scaling up the shared print activity in the U.S. and Canada. We recently posted a CRL's agenda for shared print, for shared collections, rather, for the next 10 years. And that outlined an approach to supporting and accomplishing the sharing, the greater sharing and more efficient sharing of print serials. An agenda that merges preservation and electronic access. We think that we need to do better than just agreements to keep materials. I think just agreements to keep materials are our first step. But I think given the urgency of the pressures on libraries to divest of print, we have to move very quickly from the first step to the second step, which combines electronic access. So the portal or the Global Collections platform will help us draw in community support and community interest and a sense of the community's priorities. So this is really kind of a way of actualizing what CRL is about. It's a community of libraries that are committed to the integrity and accessibility of critical evidence. That was our mission back in 1949, and it's still our mission. It's just the means to that end have evolved. So, thanks.
I'm pleased to represent the next part of this presentation to talk about the Global Collections Initiative. You may be asking yourself, what's a Global Collections Initiative versus a platform? I'd be happy to give you some clarification on this and provide a progress report on the activities that CRL has been doing in connections with the announcement from October of 2016, in which we mentioned that the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation has provided support to CRL to develop an integrated self-sustaining international framework to support area and international studies in the humanities and social sciences. That news item is posted on CRL's website, and it delineates the program that we're calling the Global Collections Initiative. The initiative itself had its seeds in the development of the Global Resources Network, an initiative that was supported originally by ARL and the Association of American Universities, and assumed by CRL as an integral part of our services in 2006. CRL supports a number of communities of interest through the Global Resources program, and we continue to support areas in the activities of digitization, access, and preservation of resources through that program. In 2012, CRL and Duke University sponsored a conference on the global dimensions of scholarship and research libraries, at which librarians, scholars, representatives of scholarly associations, and funding bodies all gathered to examine the growing internationalization of the curriculum and the campus, as well as the trends in scholarship towards international studies. That conference and intensive conversations that happened thereafter, both via online discussion as well as through subsequent meetings regionally and at CRL's forums, really made clear that research libraries must scale up their efforts to internationalize their approaches towards collecting and providing access to primary source documentation in support of this increasing interdisciplinary audience. We talked about the growing interest in scholarly interest in data. So too are we seeing growing interest in primary source collections from around the world, where constituencies such as those in the business, legal, financial communities are seeking information the other direction, that is, the materials formerly considered strictly the domain of area studies, or perhaps political science. So, following that conference and in conjunction with CRL members and other institutions with whom we've been in conversation, CRL proposed a planning effort to devise this framework called the Global Collections Initiative, through which we would explore interest among CRL members, constituent licensing and digitization bodies, and an international audience to explore the opportunities for a framework to support area and international studies in electronic form for the humanities and social sciences. The initial development phase of the Global Collections Initiative will lay the groundwork for a scalable, ongoing program that will support access to source materials for the study of languages, cultures, peoples, and regions outside of North America or Europe. The ultimate goals of the Global Collections Initiative are to expand electronic access to formerly paper-based resources from those regions, and to forge an international partnership at the national level to develop, license, and acquire new digital resources for areas in international studies research for North American, European, and source region institutions as well. With funding from the Mellon Foundation, CRL has launched the development phase of the Global Collections that will support a 2-year program to focus on source materials for the study of one region, for Latin America and the Caribbean, as well as diaspora communities emanating from that region. The development phase, which is scheduled to last 2 years from October 2016 through September of 2018, have 3 separate but related objectives or work streams where we're pursuing activities. The first one would be to create a sustainable apparatus for the electronic access to primary source documentation. And Bernie's discussion about the Global Collections Platform is an integral piece of that apparatus, which we can identify and prioritize materials. The second objective would be to establish an international framework for collective dealings with publishers and other aggregators of key databases. This is strongly related to the licensing component. And third, to assess the major web archiving practices for area studies collections and to create a sustainable plan for the ongoing capture and archiving of born digital source materials for area and international studies. Can I have the next slide, please? CRL has been building an international network of sponsoring organizations that can help steer and govern the program, as well as source and provide funding and in-kind support on behalf of the research libraries in 5 separate domains: the United States, Canada, the UK, Germany, and Latin America. The development phase sponsoring organizations include CRL, representing its 215 plus member institutions, the Canadian Research Knowledge Network, JISC and RL UK as participants as well, and the German Research Foundation, or the Deutsche Forschgemeinschaft, here known as the DFG. These sponsoring organizations will provide the advice and governance for guiding this program as we continue to shape its effort and to scale it up into additional world regions. And here we list some of the initial participants with the Latin American initiative, including the Ibero-Americanische Institute in Germany, a number of UK institutions, as well as partners within Latin America itself. We've brought in the Colegio de Mexico, as well as the Fundación Getulio Vargas in Brazil, and a number of other invitations are outstanding at this point. So the 3 work streams, I just want to address briefly each one in turn, including the apparatus for electronic access. This relates strongly to CRL's digital initiatives. CRL, as Bernie mentioned, has been providing digital access through on-demand scanning as well as through strategic planning priorities. Through the Global Collections Initiative, we're seeking to scale that up and to solicit widely from scholars and from library experts the collections of interest that CRL and its partner institutions can prioritize and fund for ongoing digitization. The kinds of resources that we have and continue to make available from our own collections include those like what you see on the screen here, Bohemia, which is a popular news weekly from Cuba that is, in fact, still in publication. This resource is being used presently by a faculty member from Cornell to mine the data of Latin American literary publications from the modern era to study the trends of influence and other topics related. CRL's strategic work is also supported through its area materials programs and through the global resources programs. And in particular, I'm just pointing out here a project from the University of Florida and the Digital Library the University of Florida and DLOC to support the digitization of newspapers from Latin America and the Caribbean. This project in particular relates to the Diario de Pernambuco, which is one of the oldest newspapers still in circulation in Latin America. And the issues from 1825 to 1923 were supported with funding from LAMP, which was formerly the Latin American Microform Project and is now the Latin American Materials Project, and additional support from CRL from its incentive funding for digitization. This material is being made available on University of Florida's platform, as you can see here. So within the parameters of the priorities for Latin America, we are seeking feedback widely from the CRL membership and from participating institutions on the kinds of materials, be they general broad collections or specific titles and specific resources that we can prioritize within the Global Collections platform that Bernie pointed out. Some of those areas include the formats or subject priorities that you see here on the screen. For time reasons, I won't particularly mention those here. Moving on, we've already talked about the licensing framework in the first session today, in which we were broadening the network of institutions to look at licenses and products of interest that we might be able to license in common. Through the Global Collections Initiative, we're having broad conversations with our partners in Germany, in the UK, and in Latin America about ways that we can harmonize licensing language across international agreements in order to pursue databases of particular interest. And here, we see a lot of harmony with the global data collections that we had through the forum, in which a number of our constituent partners abroad see great interest in the economic, financial, population, and geospatial data that are out there, and looking for ways that they can license that on a more equitable framework. So we will be continuing these conversations with the partners in the Global Collections Initiative, and hopefully be coming up with a set of priorities that we can negotiate as a group or in concert with each other with transparent terms, equitable pricing. And where data products may not yet exist, we do look to frame and negotiate with publishers the terms for the joint development of those new databases. These might be microfilm collections held in the vault of Gale or ProQuest, or within European repositories as well. Finally, I just want to mention the third work stream here as we wrap up, Born Digital Collection Development. This is an area of particular interest, but one that is still, I think, lagging behind in terms of the supply chain. In particular, web archiving is an area that's had much discussion, and CRL has had discussions among its membership about this, because web-based content and other born digital forms of documentation are routinely used by scholars, but libraries are ill-prepared to continue to harvest and make this accessible in a usable format in a way that's easily discoverable. So web archiving, in particular for Latin America, seems to be lagging behind European and US efforts in this. To date, only one institution from Latin America is involved with the International Internet Preservation Consortium, and that's the National Library of Chile. The National Library of Spain continues to provide some advocacy and is in some discussions with other institutions there, but there are no domain-based harvesting that are publicly accessible through major web archiving initiatives. The Ibero-Americanos Institute does some selective harvesting of targeted web documents, mostly PDF files from Latin America. The IAI harvests between 2,000 and 3,000 PDFs per year. CRL wants to take a broad look across the variety of these programs in order to assess the efficacy of the selection, the harvesting tools, and the display and discoverability of these resources in order to frame, hopefully, a better and more comprehensive program for the born digital collection and accessibility to these resources. This is the area where we're perhaps most exploratory in the Global Collections Initiative, but it's one that we want to make sure that we look at carefully and we get it right so that we can pursue a articulated plan of action moving forward. So for this phase, we're planning on just doing an assessment of particular programs that are currently engaged in born digital collection development. And those include the Human Rights Web Archive at Columbia, a similar program for Latin America that the University of Texas is doing, which also includes government documentation. the web archiving collections that the Library of Congress has done on event-based activities, as well as those that are being done broadly speaking in the Internet Archive or through the Archivit collection program. Further information on this will be forthcoming. Finally, I just wanted to mention that as we work through this development phase and we put together the infrastructure and the governing bodies, we're going to look for ways that we can scale this up and involve additional world regions. We hope that this template will be inspirational and usable for a variety of world regions, and we have hopes of continuing this further into subject areas and world regions like Africa, the Middle East, South and Southeast Asia, as well as China, in particular Chinese business and data resources that are being made available, but perhaps not in ways that all libraries have access to it. So we're going to continue to explore this. We're going to have a plenary program on this towards the end of the 2-year phase, at which we take a close look at how we can move this forward, study the Born Digital Collections, and propose some actions moving forward. I'd like to thank the Andrew W. Mellon Foundation for their support in getting this initiative off the ground, and to you, our CRL member institutions that are supporting this through your advice, through your prioritization of collections, through your financial support and your goodwill in providing us advice and information. So I'd like to turn this over to the third part of our presentation, if we move on to the next slide here, where we want to focus on the South Asian activities. And we've brought with us, I'm very pleased to introduce Mary Rader, who's the Assistant Director of Research and the South Asia Librarian at the University of Texas at Austin, who will be discussing the South Asia Open Archives. Mary?
Good. Thanks, James.
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So let me just go ahead and get started. It's my great pleasure to be able to join in this webinar today and to discuss the emerging work of the South Asia Open Archives, formerly known as the SAMP Open Archives Initiative, or SAMP OAI. I'm especially happy to be talking about the South Asia Open Archives here at the end of a long day and day-long CRL membership meeting, as the project is a natural outgrowth of the over 65 years of collaboration CRL has provided our community in collecting materials for the cooperative good, sharing them as and where we can, and preserving source material, including that which is little known and oftentimes lesser used, for scholars and researchers long into the future. I'm also happy to talk about the Open Archives as a project of SAMP, the South Asian Materials Program, formerly the South Asian Microform Program, as this year itself, SAMP is celebrating its 50th year of collectively funding the preservation and access of South Asian materials. While the first thing you might notice from these beginning comments is that we're old, which is what I'm trying to show on this slide here, and perhaps the second thing you might notice, next slide please, is that we're fickle about our name, the takeaway I'm hoping for is that you'll recognize that while we're established and institutionalized, we are not static. We are ever seeking to evolve and adapt to new information needs and user behavior. For those less current with South Asia collections, let me give you a quick refresher as it provides context for these open archives. Next slide, please. While many libraries and research centers around the country had small pockets of South Asia-related material before the 1950s, the majority of the big South Asia collections in the United States came to their current expansive state under the PL 480 and subsequent Library of Congress Cooperative Acquisitions Program schemes. Next slide. We have all benefited greatly by these schemes, not only because of the tremendous amount of and variety of material acquired, but also because of the technical support associated with them, including procurement, shipping, and cataloging records. Next slide. Because the material was so far-reaching and frankly just so voluminous, it has been a special help over the years to have CRL pick up, retain, and serve subsets of this material, particularly those materials in subjects or formats not of immediate user demand in the majority of South Asian Studies programs, for example, science journals from South Asia. Next slide. The PL 480 and LC programs were certainly robust and expansive, but they were not highly nuanced to individual institutional needs, somewhat like the big deals for STEM journals we've seen over the past couple of decades. Nor were they good for historical rather than currently commercially available materials, which is also remarkably parallel to the big deals in its presentist orientation. Next slide. This is where SAMP comes in. Driven by member initiative, funded through annual membership fees, and ably administrated through CRL, Next slide. SAMP has allowed libraries, librarians, and collectors of materials to collaborate in gathering, preserving, and providing access to research materials to users. Next slide. Perhaps small in scale and deterministically grassroots in its orientation, SAMP, like its siblings in the other AMP programs, has been an indispensable tool for capturing and saving research material to the benefit of us all, particularly that not supplied by or predating the PL 480 and LC programs. Next slide. If we look to the pre-PL 480 holdings in CRL, for example, holdings are largely created through the SAMP program. This impact is very clear. So in this brief history lesson, I'm trying to demonstrate that we South Asian Studies libraries and librarians in the United States know how to work together, including at the institutional level. We know how to identify gaps in the accessible research archive, how to collectively fund our initiatives, and how to rely on CRL for support. Enter the South Asia Open Archives. Next slide. In an effort to provide an alternative to unsatisfying commercial enterprises, to respond to the recent reductions in grant funding, such as but not limited to the Title VI program, and to develop best practices which do not leave out our partners around the world, a subgroup of SAMP has recently begun a new initiative to crowdsource resources, be they financial, digital, or human, to create and disseminate open access resources related to South Asian studies. The initiative is based on the premise that subject specialists focused on South Asia are in the best position to set priorities for the near and middle-term future of library resources on South Asia, to direct plans for the expansion of those resources, to create relationships with existing and emerging mass digitization projects, and finally to collaborate with repositories in the development of improved tools for the discovery of digital objects. Next slide. Access to resources is a fundamental requirement for South Asian studies. This initiative addresses increased expectations by scholars for integrated and open access to historical and contemporary materials across all disciplines. While addressing the expectations of North American scholars, it is also desirable, if not frankly imperative, that researchers elsewhere in the world have access to such materials. Our platform of texts and data shared worldwide will improve the quality of scholarship and increase the likelihood of collaborative research by peers across national boundaries. Next slide. During the past decade, collections for South Asian studies have not benefited from expanded digital resources in the same measure as library collections for other area studies regions. And it goes without saying that South Asian digital collections are dramatically smaller than those for North American and European studies. Next slide. Commercial vendors have often been concerned about the limited market for quote-unquote niche products in North America. Commercial products, when created and offered, have often been expensive in North America and prohibitively so in South Asia. Next slide. Google Books and other mass digitization projects are frequently focused on publications in European languages and Roman scripts, and have more recently limited their digitization and delivery of resources that might be the objects of conflict concerning intellectual property rights. Next slide. The coordinated activities proposed under the South Asian Open Archives is hoped to reverse the current paucity of digital resources. We are still in the early stages of our development, but let me explain where we currently are. Next slide. We have tried to be creative and inclusive in our membership, building upon the collaborative but centralized model of SAMP, but also reaching out more purposefully to institutions and partners within South Asia itself. In seeking members, we've required 5-year commitments of resources, time, and or money. For example, $25,000 payable over 5 years, a 0.2 FTE of staff support, and or significant contributions of digital assets. 23 institutional members have joined since our initial membership drives of 2015 and 2016, and we continue to seek more. Next slide. Distributing the considerable work for a new initiative such as this has been a challenge in the first year. We have organized ourselves into an executive committee selected by the South Asia Open Archives membership and 3 major working groups: digitization, infrastructure, and funding. And we've been able to hire a full-time project manager and digital librarian, Mr. Neil Agarwal, to move our aspirations forward. Next slide, please. Our digitization working group provides recommendations on all matters associated with our core mission of creating a carefully curated open access collection of digitized resources. These include, but are not limited to, the identification, selection, and prioritization of target materials to be digitized meeting the criteria laid out in our collection guidelines document, approaches to copyright clearance, consultation with the infrastructure working group regarding technical specifications and standards, for example, for digitization and metadata, and contracting with institutions around the world to conduct digitization and create metadata. The digitization efforts that we are currently involved in throughout the U.S. and South Asia include colonial-era women's journals in Hindi, Tamil, and Urdu, a pilot project for the mass digitization of colonial official publications of India, a wide range of literary monographs, and as well as bringing already digitized runs of major newspapers and press digests. For example, the Punjab newspaper reports, also known as the native newspaper reports of the British government, into the online collection. The working group has developed an online form to solicit additional suggestions for digitization and to assemble data on each title to enable selection. The group is working with the executive board to explore the possibilities of CRL's new G Collections recommendation system that Bernie just described for transmitting selections to the board for vetting and approval. Next slide, please. Our infrastructure working group provides recommendations on all matters associated with the supporting framework. These include administration, staffing, strategic partnerships, digitization standards, metadata and preservation, computing and other technology, web presence, and intellectual property rights. Major projects include establishing technical standards for projects and making recommendations on potential hosting, discovery, and preservation platforms. In our first year, we have created a technical standards document to outline 5 major areas for consideration. Those are metadata, digitization, hosting, discovery, and preservation. We are using this document to inform our discussions as we seek technical partners to make our own content and that of sister projects both discoverable and usable. We are eager to learn more about advanced platforms that might serve as possible solutions to our infrastructure needs, such as the Digital Delivery System, or DDS3, that CRL is developing. Other possibilities might be through JSTOR and Ithaca and others. Next slide, please. Our funding working group provides recommendations to help ensure the financial well-being of the South Asia Open Archive. These include, but are not limited to, fundraising from external sources, development of cash flow projections, and solicitation of new members. Within the next year, the funding working group will focus on matters such as identifying funding opportunities, applying for grants, engaging new member institutions from South Asia, Europe, and North America, and planning for the use of in-kind resources. Next slide, please. The work before us is daunting, but we are excited about the possibilities. Knowing that we can build upon our long history of achievements in working together and relying on the tremendous staff and administrative support of CRL and of SAMP, I'm confident that we'll be successful. We're further excited to provide pilot examples for other AMPS or Global Resources Network partners to explore. As we move forward, we welcome your feedback, suggestions, and questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. That was a wonderful overview of the program, and it's ambitious and forward-thinking. This is something that we've been very happy to see come out of the SAMP program. I should mention, you mentioned a couple of acronyms there, and I just wanted to throw one out there. You suggested the DDS3 platform. This was something that, due to space considerations, I couldn't present earlier, but DDS broadly refers to CRL's document delivery service. That's the platform that we've built in-house to host and serve the digital collections that CRL brings to the scholars at institutions, whether they be open access materials or member access only. We call it DDS3 because we're working on our 3rd generation of the DDS system, and our systems team, headed by Patricia Xia, and all of whom are in the room with us today actually, have been hard at work at planning and conceiving what the next generation of CRL's digital delivery will look like. This is something that we are actively planning and working on in development, and we hope that programs like the SAMP Open Archives, the Global Collections Initiative, and others that are coming in will make use of. This is it's an effort that we're looking to bring this up into much more functionality than we have presently in our existing system. This would include the capacity for cross-collection search, for interoperability with other platforms through the IIIF framework, and more enhanced metadata to allow better cross-collection browsing, faceted searching, and the like. So there's that. We're going to collect some comments here as we go through the chat screens here. Mary, I thought you did a great overview of this, and it seems like there's a lot of similarity to the initiative that we described, the Global Collections Initiative, in which we're looking to broaden the participation of institutions. One of the things that I think you've highlighted, and just to put a fine point on it, is that this is positively declared as an open access initiative, whereas CRL's Global Collections Initiative may or may not be restricted to materials that are accessible to the members or participating institutions. Do you have some thoughts on how this emphasis is putting SAMP forward in this thinking?
Well, in general, I think open access is good, and especially as we think about trying to share our resources internationally and globally. Oftentimes when we have created products in the United States or in Europe, we have actually left out our source countries, and both sometimes maybe by design, but unfortunately that has left out a whole community from having access to the resources that they need. And when we do create them digitally, oftentimes not only can our highly funded research libraries not afford them, it is impossible for our sister institutions in the subcontinent to do so. So I think it is a moral imperative that we try to create this material in an open access way.
Mm-hmm. So
that has its own challenges, of course,
yeah.
but we're sticking to our goal.
I've had a couple of questions about kind of the prioritization and participation. Berdine, do you want to take on this question?
Yeah, we have someone asked says that we used to have an actual South Asia librarian, but he retired in the 1980s and has since passed away. And that I, the questioner, am now nominally the South Asian librarian and SAMP representative, but it's a tiny, tiny part of my job. The true experts in South Asia studies at the university are the faculty, and they are a moving target, as we know. The question is, does SAMP plan to develop material for helping librarians reach faculty for their input on what they'd like to see digitized? That's a question for Mary, but on the Global Collections Initiative, we got the same question, and we are the platform for proposing, nominating, and voting on priorities will be open to faculty as well. We're making an effort to involve faculty in the advisory group.
Yeah, can I chime in?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that is a really good question, whoever asked it, and it is something that's very current in our mind. We've tried to be expansive in advertising that we're trying to do this, and that it's an open access initiative. And as part of our digitization project working group, they are now getting close to the point where we can solicit input on what people would like us to work on. And we're going to start with SAMP member institutions and having people reach out to their faculty that way, but we don't imagine that that's where we'll stop. And so we would like to continue to make sure that we're soliciting input from folks everywhere as much as they're invested in engaging with us and trying to respond as much as possible to folks' needs. And not just faculty, of course, researchers everywhere.
Good. Let's see if there's any further questions here from the audience. One of the aspects I think that are in common to both the SAMP Open Archives Initiative and the Global Collections Initiative relate to the sourcing of the materials. In some cases, we're talking about collections that are held at CRL, centralized within our collections, but in many other cases, we're also opening up the selection and prioritization from the collections within partner institutions, or even further from institutions that may need support from those participating institutions. I think that we've seen that in the SAMP Open Archives especially, Do you agree, Mary?
Yeah, definitely we were trying to, it's easier when we can source the material from our own member institutions, assuming that we have the intellectual property permissions that we need. But we are definitely trying to use this as networking and partner building possibilities, and as much as we can, trying to reach out to material and partners that we don't usually connect with. Is that your question?
That was it. That's great. Yeah. Same,
Okay.
Same here.
Okay.
Good. Well, I don't see further questions. So I think, I certainly hope that we provided some insights to the members about some of the initiatives that we have planned. There was just one final question about the Global Collections platform, which Bernie demonstrated, and I was asking about where we might be able to see that or when we might be able to see that. It's in sort of the final development phase, and we wanted to preview it here, but we didn't want to throw it open until we actually had some testers and some real data in there for people to take a look at. So that's going to be happening here in the next few months, and we'd welcome your expressions of interest if you want to be a tester or a focus group for us as we develop that. We'll be extending that broadly to the membership as well as to some of the area projects to see if this is useful in their selection and prioritization as well. So stay tuned for more information about that. I'm going to turn this over to Virginia Kerr for a wrap-up.
Thanks, James, and thanks to all of our speakers and commenters today in this forum this afternoon. I think you'll agree that we've covered a lot of territory here. I want to remind you that recordings of these presentations will be available on CRL's YouTube channel in the coming weeks, and we will send a notification to all registrants when the recordings are available. I also want to remind you of upcoming CRL events. First of all, the Friday of the ALA conference in Chicago, CRL is hosting a forum, a luncheon meeting open to staff at all CRL member libraries to further discuss the shared print initiative, which Bernie has certainly discussed in detail in his blog post and which was touched on this morning at the council meeting. We invite anyone available to attend that. To remind everyone, a registration is available now. That will be held immediately following the PAN meeting, the Print Archive Network meeting. We will announce later the location, somewhere in the convention center. Next slide. Immediately following that luncheon meeting, we are offering a tour of CRL that's often popular with people if you can get away from the other meetings, and we will provide transportation to and from CRL so that you can get back for other meetings. Space will be limited for that tour, so again, we request that you register in advance. And next slide, we want to remind you that, as Bernie Reilly mentioned this morning and Scott mentioned this morning, the next meeting in 2018, the next annual meeting, will be held here in Chicago, an in-person meeting, and look for more details to follow on our website about that. Next slide. So we encourage you to stay in touch with CRL through information posted on our website, through our e-newsletter, Connect, which comes out every 2 to 3 weeks. We now have a new edition, a Scholars edition of Connect. The next Scholars edition will come out sometime this summer, and that has content we hope can be aimed specifically at faculty and researchers with information on acquisitions, digitization, etc., tidbits of interest we hope that you can pass on to scholars at your institution. CRL is available on Facebook and Twitter. We hope you connect with us there. And as you log out today, there is an exit survey. Your feedback is extremely important to us in planning future programming for CRL. And with that, we will say thank you and goodbye for the afternoon.